U.S. and Canadian authorities, along with local police, say a new and serious problem is developing in South Florida. We call it the Canadian connection. More and more Canadian criminals are coming to the sunny climate, and police say they don't have the resources to keep them under control. They're getting into business here and are suspected of creating a new criminal force in South Florida. Channel 7 reporters Vic Walter and Mark Potter have been investigating this problem, and here is Mark Potter's opening report.
The man in the middle is Marcel Salvai. He has been described before the Quebec Police Commission as a small-town French-Canadian crime boss. Salvai is wanted in Canada on charges that include extortion, assault, arson, and fraud. He lives in South Florida and is shown here outside a North Dade nightclub. Local police and federal authorities believe that behind the glittering lights of North Dade and South Broward counties lurk an increasing number of Canadian organized crime figures.
Right now we have 50 to 75 significant Canadian OC figures down here in South Florida, and this does not necessarily mean that that's all there is or that's the extent of the problem, because it's kind of a compounding effect. These people have different associations with other Canadian OC figures and also our American OC people down here. So you might be talking roughly 300-400 people, and these people are running a variety of illegal activities, from the traditional ones, extortion, loan sharking, gambling, prostitution, to some of your newer, more sophisticated crimes such as infiltration of legitimate business, counterfeiting, different types of smuggling, currency, gems, jewelry, and also illegal aliens bringing in Italians and other French Canadians into the United States.
52 Avenue, Northwest 104th Street. Under unknown previous case number 307.
Law enforcers say the problem is growing and admit they cannot keep pace. According to a secret U.S. government intelligence report obtained by Channel 7 News, with the intensity of present activity, it can be predicted that Canadian crime groups may soon rival the degree of influence felt by the U.S. Mafia families operating in Florida. In the last few years, South Florida has become a mecca for Canadians, and the millions of Canadian dollars pouring into South Broward and North Dade real estate. One real estate economist says Canadians spend $250 million a year in Dade real estate alone. And the Miami Beach Tourist Development Authority says 300,000 Canadians come to South Florida every year to visit. Fear of a climbing inflation rate in Canada and talk of secession in Quebec province have driven many legitimate and honest Canadians to the sunny climes. But with the honest Canadians has come the hoodlum element. And now that Canada has a public investigation of organized crime similar to New Jersey's successful effort, South Florida has become a favorite retreat for Canadians, with arrest warrants or subpoenas waiting at home. Of all the Canadian crime figures who migrated to Florida, the most notorious is William Aubrant, often called the Meyer Lansky of Canadian organized crime. Aubrant is the financial advisor to the Montreal Mafia, the multi-million-dollar money man. In this plush complex at 3140 South Ocean Drive in Hallandale, Aubrant rented an apartment and hid from Canadian authorities. He also set up business deals and became an American citizen. Aubrant is now in prison outside Montreal, having been captured and committed there for a $500,000 fraud and for income tax violations. In as early as 3 weeks, however, his sentence may be complete, and Aubrant will be deported from Canada. And local police fear that this man, with ties to the upper echelon of the Montreal Mafia, will soon return to South Florida, where he has already established contacts in foliage, nightclub, and food businesses. We will examine those later. To fully understand the Canadian connection to South Florida, Channel 7 News went to Montreal, where over 2 million people live on the bank of the St. Lawrence River and where the predominant language is French. It is a city where organized crime is so widespread that sections in town, such as the old Italian area with its Mafia ties, have become known for the crime factions that control them. Montreal is also the hometown of most of the Canadian criminals who visit or live in South Florida. The Canadian godfather is Vincent Catroni, the man who helped make Montreal the North American base for the infamous heroin route known as the French Connection. Montreal is also a city where bloodshed is common as the powerful criminal organizations fight for control. An example occurred on January 22nd, 1978 at precisely 7:32 p.m. here on Rue Jean Talon in Montreal's Italian northeast side. In the innocent-looking ice cream factory and espresso bar behind me, a murder took place that shook the very foundation of the Montreal Mafia and made Miami police pay special attention to one of our visitors.
No, I don't want to testify.
Do you refuse?
I don't say I do refuse.
The victim was Paolo Violi, the Montreal Mafia's second in command. He was shot and killed inside the Reggio bar while playing cards with friends. Even before Violi's lavish funeral was over, police were speculating on who would succeed him. A name that was considered for a while is that of Joseph DeMallo, a frequent Hollywood, Florida resident, one-time Miami Beach nightclub owner, and a high-ranking member of the Montreal Mafia. According to the Quebec Police Commission, DeMallo was part owner of Le Cellier, a club that used to operate in the Barcelona Hotel on Miami Beach. This house is where DeMallo and his family are part-time residents. Owned by his brother, it is at 1402 Wiley Street in Hollywood. DeMallo's wife is shown here. Other visitors to the house have also interested police. This boy is the son of Frank Catroni, the brother of the Canadian godfather. Catroni has just been released from prison, and police believe he is the prime candidate now to take over the Montreal Mafia's day-to-day operations. Prior to Catroni's release, his son and wife waited at this Hollywood house. Other Canadians under police surveillance who have been spotted in South Florida include Eugene Lefort, a reputed French-Canadian gang leader with a long violent arrest record and suspected ties to the Montreal Mafia. Irving Goldstein, a business partner of DeMallo and Abrant and a Mafia junket organizer. Claude Faber, a suspected Mafia associate. And Giuseppe Cocoliccio, a Montreal Mafia gambling house operator. The bottom line is that the Canadian criminals are here, their numbers are increasing, and the police feel it is something to worry about. Tomorrow on the Canadian Connection, reporter Vic Walton will take a close look at some of the businesses in operation now that the police are keeping their eyes on. He will also pinpoint some of the Canadians who have appeared in police files and who have traveled from the north to set up shop here in the sunny climes. Mark Potter for Channel 7 News.
To show just how strong the American-Canadian mob connection is in South Florida, in 1970, Miami Beach resident and reputed financial genius of the American mob, Meyer Lansky, traveled to Acapulco, Mexico. There, he met with two leaders of the Canadian mob, Paolo Violi and Vic Catroni. Violi was since murdered inside this Montreal coffee shop a year and a half ago. Vic Catroni, also known as the Canadian Godfather, attended the Mexico meeting with his brother and second-in-command, Frank Catroni. Police are still trying to determine why Lansky, Violi, and the Catroni brothers held the secret get-together.
Is there such a thing as the Canadian mob?
Yes, definitely.
Bruno Granolo is a Canadian who knows and associates with members of the Canadian underworld. In 1975, he was arrested by North Miami Beach police for soliciting prostitution. Granolo's story is that he ran an elaborate escort service. The operation folded upon his conviction. Authorities also suspected Granolo had something to do with gun smuggling and counterfeiting activities between Canada and South Florida. In 1976, he was twice called before a federal grand jury to answer questions about the activities, but was never charged with either crime. Granolo now lives in North Miami and owns a disco lighting business, but says he is having trouble making ends meet. And Granolo says he wouldn't hesitate turning to members of Canadian organized crime, like Frank Catroni, for help.
Like I told you before, if he was here right now, if he was in Miami, I'll ask Frank, can you help me out and promote my business? I would. I would.
Do you think Frank may be coming down here soon?
I hope he does. I hope he does. How many people they help? They help everybody.
I'm talking about the Mafia.
Well, I don't call it mafia. They're business people. You see, like right now, I need help here.
3 years ago, members of the Canadian mob invested money in a disco club located inside the Barcelona Hotel on Miami Beach. Le Cellier, as it was called, had been partially owned by William O'Brunt, known as the Meyer Lansky of the Canadian criminals. O'Brunt's partners in the business were Irving Goldstein and Joe DeMallo, two Montreal mobsters who fled to Miami when the Quebec Police Commission began holding hearings on organized crime. Le Cellier no longer exists at the Barcelona Hotel, yet local and Canadian police continue to probe O'Brunt's other South Florida business interests and his associates. Associates like this man, Bernard Kahlenberg, a Canadian citizen now living in this $125,000 Boynton Beach home. He is currently awaiting trial in Palm Beach County on 55 counts of grand larceny. Kahlenberg was once corporate director of Pan Can Am Floral Associates, based in Delray Beach.
In November 1976, Kahlenberg declared the business bankrupt, but state prosecutors claim that prior to declaring bankruptcy, Kahlenberg used large sums of company money to pay off personal loans and debts. And my sources tell me they suspect Willie O'Brunt had an interest in Pam Can-Am, since records showed O'Brunt was on the payroll. Pam Can-Am was once housed inside this building. Now there is a new company here called CPAC South Cultured Plants Incorporated. On corporate papers, Kahlenberg's son Arthur is listed as president and director of CPAC South Cultured Plants, but my sources claim that Bernard Kahlenberg still oversees the operation. We asked Kahlenberg for an interview, but he refused.
Police are also investigating another Canadian who lives in this Hallandale trailer home.
Hello, is Mr. Meredith here?
What?
Mr. Meredith?
Not here now.
Claude Meredith?
Not here.
Not there?
Montreal?
Oh, he's in Montreal?
Yes. Can I leave a message or what?
Okay, when will he be back, do you know? That's the camera.
Police suspect that Canadian organized crime associate Claude Meredith may be meeting with Montreal mob heavyweights Joe DeMallo and Frank Catroni, who are favorites in the race to succeed Paolo Violi. Until his murder a year and a half ago, Violi was one of the leaders of Canadian organized crime. Police suspect that Meredith holds some interest in the Chicken Coop restaurant and lounge on Miami Beach. According to authorities, it is a favorite watering hole for Canadian crime figures in South Florida. Inside the club is an area known as Claude's Private Bar, and police point to that fact as one reason for their suspicion. Tomorrow, more on the Canadian connection to this Miami Beach night spot and the suspected Canadian connection to this restaurant and lounge in North Bay Village. Vic Walter, Channel 7 News. This is the Top Draw Club located on Northeast 79th Street in North Bay Village. The person who is listed as owner of the private club is Nancy Kelly, although police suspect expatriate Canadian Dougie Stevens has an alleged hidden financial interest in the club. Stevens has for many years been a close associate of this man, William O'Brunt, known as the financial manipulator for the Canadian mob. I tried to ask Stevens about his relationship with O'Brunt.
Could we ask you a few questions?
I have nothing to say to you, gentlemen. I appreciate you coming over and photographing the place. Make sure you take it.
Since this encounter with Dougie Stevens and Nancy Kelly, I have repeatedly tried to interview both. But Nancy Kelly told Channel 7 she would only consent to an interview in the presence of her attorney. In 1971, the Top Draw Club was known as the Pagoda Restaurant and was owned by Dougie Stevens. But according to a report by the Quebec Police Commission, Willie O'Brunt was suspected to be the money man behind the operation. Large amounts of money reportedly changed hands between Stevens and O'Brunt on several occasions.
In testimony taken from the Quebec Police Commission's hearings on organized crime, the pagoda was described as a gambling den for both American and Canadian mobsters who conducted bookmaking activities from inside the business.
Among those involved were associates of Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, a member of the Vito Genovese New York Mafia family. As a result of these meetings, Dougie Stevens was called before a United States grand jury on 2 separate occasions. Both times he refused to testify, and both times he was sent to jail for contempt. On November 10, 1977, Stevens was convicted of 2 counts of bookmaking here in Dade County and was fined $300. Also charged with bookmaking was Archie Stott. Stott, seen here outside the Top Draw Club, is Nancy Kelly's father. This man frequents the Top Draw Club on almost a daily basis. He is Joe Paterno, identified by a U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee as a captain in the New York-based Carlo Gambino Mafia family.
This just verifies our intelligence that the Top Draw is frequented by high-level members of organized crime, and we think used for high-level meetings.
Possibly with the Canadian figures now.
And with Canadian figures. There might be more of a possible involvement with Canadian organized crime people into the area of narcotics, since that is the paramount problem in Florida today. And that's one of the reasons we're really trying to keep tabs on these people. Organized crime families from various parts of the United States and Canada can come down here and operate, and they do so in such a manner that it is very difficult to prove, illegal activity, because they use sophisticated methods, various financial type dealings, which are very time-consuming and very expensive to investigate.
This is the inside of what used to be Tony's Fish Market, a seafood specialty restaurant located down the block from the Top Draw Club on Northeast 79th Street. Most of the restaurant has now been converted into a night spot called Disco 79. Nancy Kelly took over a lease on the building and made the expensive transformation. In newspaper ads, Nancy Kelly's name appears alongside Dougie Stevens. The names also appear together in an ad for the Top Draw Club, an indication to police that Stevens does have at least partial financial interest in both businesses.
A lot of time, their names are not actually on the books, but we suspect that they are financially behind these businesses, and we also suspect that the money originally comes from organized crime.
Namely, William O'Brien.
William O'Brien and or the Catronis.
Nancy Kelly and Dougie Stevens also run this North Miami Beach restaurant and lounge. The Chicken Coop is a favorite restaurant for both Canadian and American tourists. But it is also a favorite meeting place for Canadian criminals and their associates. Among those who frequent the Chicken Coop is George Cherry, a Canadian who, according to police, acts as host to Canadian criminals who visit South Florida. Cherry and this man travel in the same circles. He is Marcel Savai, described by the Quebec Police Commission as a small-town Canadian crime boss. Savai frequents the Chicken Coop, as does the man who lives in this plush Hallandale condominium complex. George Nezarella has been convicted in Canada of theft, fraud, and tax evasion. He is suspected by police of having hidden financial interests in the Chicken Coop on Sunny Isles Boulevard and in America Car Rental, which operates just across the street.
You own any financial interest in businesses here in South Florida?
None whatsoever, no. None.
No interest in American Car Rental?
No, none whatsoever.
No interest in the Chicken Coop restaurant?
No, definitely not. No, the food is delicious, that's about it. There's no interest at all. If you look up the records, my name will never crop up in there. There's nothing there.
He's not on the book as a licensee or officer of a corporation. We suspect that he is financially involved, though, either fronting or pouring money from organized crime into these businesses.
A spokesman for America Car Rental says George Nezarella had been employed as a manager, but was fired 3 weeks ago for incompetence. The spokesman said Nezarella never held financial interest in the company, although Nezarella admits being a close friend to Paul James, listed on corporate papers as the company's owner. Tomorrow, Mark Potter reports on a reputed Canadian crime boss who lives openly in South Florida despite the fact he is wanted by police in Canada.
Angel or devil? Which is it?
Between.
How do you do it?
Between.
Vic Walter, Channel 7 News.
The flag of Canada is not one of the foreign flags that have flown over Florida before it became a state in the Union, but it is sometimes hard to believe in South Florida, where hordes of tourists and part-time residents have migrated from Canada. The invasion has as much to do with the warm climate as with the deflation of the Canadian dollar. But our story this past week is focused on Canadians who are not concerned with tourism or a monetary shortage. They are usually well-heeled mobsters who have escaped from Canada's ongoing organized crime investigation. They are people who are involved in crime, ranging from smuggling and drug dealing to bank fraud and tax evasion. And they are Canadians who, like their U.S. counterparts, have not only infiltrated legitimate business, but who are teaming up with our own homegrown mafia to share our territory. The spirit of the U.S.-Canadian connection transcends all geopolitical lines, and the worst, we are told, is yet to come, as Canadian authorities and officials in other states put the squeeze on the mobsters who are fleeing to South Florida, a growing base for international criminal activity. Well, the solution, if any, will require a massive infusion of funds for the staging of a law enforcement counterattack, utilizing the undercover tools of federal agencies and the response of grand jury action to generate the heat necessary to dissolve the Canadian connection.
April 17, 1978. Marcel Savy appears before the Quebec Police Commission, an investigative body studying organized crime in Canada. Police describe him as a wealthy small-town crime boss. Savy denies any wrongdoing, but after the hearings are complete, he is charged with extortion, arson, assault, and fraud. October 27, 1978. Savy boards a plane at the Montreal International Airport bound for the United States. He is authorized to stay in this country for just 1 week. January 17, 1979, 3 months later. Savy is still in the U.S., but has run afoul of immigration authorities in Miami. A judge orders Savy deported because of his 1966 conviction in Canada for possessing stolen goods. May 17, 1979. Despite the deportation order, Savy is still in South Florida, living at this house at 2165 Southwest 47th Street near Fort Lauderdale. Why is Marcel Savy still here? He is taking advantage of American due process. By appealing the deportation order, he may be protected from Canadian authorities for years.
The respondent in a case such as that would have full right of appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Right now, they're taking upwards to 2 years to get it through the Board of Immigration Appeals because of the backlog. If the Board of Immigration Appeals upholds the immigration judge's decision, then the alien has a right to appeal to the Third Circuit to review the deportation order.
How long could that take?
I have seen them take as long as 3 years. I've seen some come out rather quickly in 4 to 5 months.
It is possible, then, for a person who has been ordered out of the United States by a federal judge to remain in this country legally for another 5 years, to drag it out that long.
That is correct.
Savy's Canadian connection begins in Sorel, a small shipbuilding town on the St. Lawrence River, 40 miles northeast of Montreal. This is Savy's hometown and the place where he is accused of leading a crime gang. Savy's beginnings are strange for a man described in highly publicized testimony as a gang leader. 12 years ago, he was a French fry salesman at a stand here at the intersection of Adelaide and Facette Streets in Sorel. According to testimony in the crime probe, however, he later became one of the town's most prominent businessmen, who not only directed a criminal enterprise, but who also, from time to time, worked as an informant for the police.
And whenever a competitor was not behaving to his satisfaction, he would see that action be put on him.
Judge Denise Dionne is the president of the Quebec Police Commission, which looked into Savy's activities and his relationship with the police.
He showed himself to be a police informant. And of course, keeping this good relationship with the police gave him the opportunity to attain that the police be tougher with certain people, and of course
His competitors.
Yes, and certain policemen thought that he was a law-abiding citizen.
The Quebec police now feel that Savai was not a law-abiding citizen. And in Montreal recently, an undercover police detective who asked that we protect his identity explained how Savai obtained some of his businesses.
That brasserie was one of the 11 brasseries that he owned in the Sorel and Montreal area. And he was involved in 30 or 34 businesses. And most of them was at the name of his father because he was unable to receive the Quebec alcohol license because he had a criminal record here in Montreal.
Savai has admitted to Channel 7 News that his business influence is now spreading to South Florida. He says he was the financial advisor to Le Spot, a restaurant operated at the Sheraton Beach Hotel on Collins Avenue by the Sorel Corporation. Savai's girlfriend, Lise Prue, and his cousin, Michel Berard, were corporate officers. The Sheraton Beach Hotel has since taken over ownership of Le Spot. The Sorel Corporation dropped its ownership in mid-January, about the same time that Jack Morissette, a third partner in the firm, filed assault charges against Savai.
When he grabbed me by the throat, he says, I will show you a sample how I'm going to kill you, slowly by strangulation.
Last month, Savai went to trial in Dade County on charges he made that threat. He pleaded innocent and was found not guilty. Law enforcers are watching another establishment to see if Savai is still active in business here. It is the Starting Point, a bar on the Hollywood Boardwalk which caters to Canadians. Savai denies any ties to the Starting Point, yet, as was the situation at Le Spot, his cousin is the owner and his girlfriend is listed as the only member of the board of directors. Savai admits that given the massive publicity of his case in Canada, where he is still wanted, there is reason for law enforcers here to be concerned about his residency in South Florida. However, he says he is innocent, was never a police informant, and is not here to hide. Speaking through an interpreter, he says that if certain conditions are met, he will go back to Canada to appear in court.
He's ready to go and fight those cases in Canada if you can have an insurance that he can come back here. If he's going to lose one of those cases in Canada, they can ban him for life from the States, as far as he's concerned. That's how sure of winning he is.
Why do you want to stay in the United States?
Pourquoi est-ce que tu veux demeurer aux États-Unis?
J'aime bien le climat, j'aime bien la mentalité du monde, des Américains.
He likes the weather very much, and he likes the way the American people think a lot, you know.
What do you mean by that?
Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça, t'aimes la manière de...
Ben, ils se mêlent plus de leurs affaires.
They mind more their own business.
In our next report, we'll look at the police and their admitted inability to do anything about the Canadian connection. Mark Potter for Channel 7 News. Local police admit that when it comes to investigating Canadian organized crime in South Florida, they are working in the dark. No one in South Florida is studying the problem full-time, and less than a half-dozen investigators are working on it part-time. The reason, according to a Dade County Police organized crime analyst, is threefold.
Shortage of manpower, shortage of money, and a lack of resources to really adequately do the job.
From what little they do know about the Canadian criminals in South Florida, investigators say the problem is serious. According to a U.S. government intelligence report, based on troubled economic conditions in Canada, Florida can expect a tremendous increase in Canadian crime activity. The report also says it can be predicted that Canadian crime groups may soon rival the degree of influence felt by the U.S. Mafia families operating in Florida.
Either we have a serious problem or we may just be scratching the surface and the problem may be much more serious than we currently believe.
This is the underlying reason Florida police and federal authorities say they are not looking closely at the Canadians.
We got a lot of grass here. Okay, it's up front.
Narcotics trafficking is Florida's biggest law enforcement headache and ties up most of its investigators. It leaves very few police to monitor the Canadian connection, and those who do have a unique problem.
I think one of the basic problems that we face down here is the language difference. When we're dealing with the French Canadians per se, we don't virtually have no French-speaking officers within the Organized Crime Bureau, the whole PSD.
When Florida police talk about investigating organized crime, they speak enviously of their Canadian counterparts. And here in Montreal, the police agree. They feel they do a better job. There are less restraints upon the police, more manpower, and more cooperation. There is also a better political climate for investigating organized crime. And at the center of all that is the now famous Quebec crime probe.
Mr. Violi, do you refuse to testify?
No, I never say I refuse to testify. I said before what I have to say.
The crime probe is an investigation of Canadian mob activity. Directed by the Quebec Police Commission, it has been dragging Canada's most notorious criminals into the public spotlight since 1973 and has given notoriety to previously unknown criminals. The witnesses must testify or they will go to jail. For the subjects, it's a very uncomfortable situation that has caused many Canadian crime figures to flee to South Florida.
Most of them, if not all of them, are moving to Miami or in the Dade County because they cannot stand the heat from this inquiry that we've been holding in public for more than 5 years now.
They came almost with subpoenas in hand and an airline ticket in the other hand to South Florida. And South Florida, like several of your other states, does not have a commission of investigation, so we're really at a disadvantage. The climate, the atmosphere of law enforcement is just as appealing to the Canadian organized crime people as is our sunshine.
The dismal law enforcement picture in South Florida does have a few bright spots. 3 months ago, Florida and Canadian police met in Miami to exchange information on the Canadian mobsters, and that cooperation is continuing. And Channel 7 News has learned the Justice Department is investigating William Abrat, the Montreal Mafia's financial advisor who used to live in Hallandale and who is expected to return here in as early as 3 weeks after he finishes a Canadian prison sentence for tax violations. Sources say the government plans to seek a grand jury indictment on the grounds Abrat lied in order to win American citizenship in 1975. If he is indicted and convicted, Abrat could be barred from the United States.
In our investigation of the Canadian connection, we found that 50 to 75 reputed Canadian crime figures have been spotted in South Florida, and several hundred associates are suspected here. The number of Canadian criminals in South Florida is believed to be growing. Some of them are infiltrating Florida businesses, primarily through the use of American and Canadian frontmen, and are operating free of police surveillance. Police fear they may be involved in numerous crimes, including extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, prostitution, infiltration of legitimate business, counterfeiting, stock fraud, harboring fugitives, hiding illegal aliens, currency smuggling, jewel smuggling, drug dealing, and tax evasion.
Since we began airing this series of reports, we have received numerous phone calls from viewers with information about the Canadian connection. Some have said they are victims and are living in fear of the Canadian mob in South Florida. While we may still be a little ahead of the ultimate story, the viewer response convinces us we have touched upon a real problem. The Canadian criminals, if not South Florida's biggest law enforcement problem now, apparently have the potential of becoming one of our biggest headaches in a few years. Police say the Canadian influx is similar to the way other mobsters came to South Florida, a slow, quiet move into legitimate business. And they admit the greatest danger of all is that the police themselves have not yet come to grips with the Canadian connection.
Mark Potter for Channel 7 News. William Abrat has been described by authorities as the financial advisor to the Montreal Mafia. According to the Quebec Police Commission, the 55-year-old Abrat was the million-dollar money mover for the organization and was close to its leadership. He has been referred to as the Meyer Lansky of Canadian organized crime. Abrat now lives in Bal Harbour and, as of today, is a free man after spending 3 years in a Montreal prison.
Feels terrific.
In a Channel 7 News investigative series, The Canadian Connection, Abrat was named as one of several Canadian organized crime figures with ties to South Florida. He used to live in Hallandale, was involved in several businesses, and in 1975 became an American citizen. It is that citizenship that has been drawn into question. Last week, a Miami federal grand jury indicted Abrat on charges he lied on his citizenship application. When he was released last Friday from the Canadian prison, where he served time for fraud, tax violations, and contempt of court, Abrat was promptly deported and was handed over to American authorities who brought him to Miami. Today at his arraignment, he pleaded innocent, but refused to talk about his finances. Abrat was released on bond. This is the Kenilworth complex on Collins Avenue, where Abrat will live in an apartment his wife bought 2 years ago for $160,000 in cash. His family says it's now worth $250,000. In order to stay here, all Abrat has to do is show up for his court hearings. If not, the apartment will be turned over to the government. If he is convicted, Abrat could be sentenced to prison once again, and someday could face American deportation hearings. Mark Potter for Channel 7 News.